When a caterpillar is born, all it wants to do is consume. Driven by the singular goal of gluttony, it munches mindlessly, relentlessly, insatiably, up to 25,000 times its own body weight. Unconcerned with consequences, its persistent pursuit, oftentimes destroying the very plant it depends on. Swelling with every bite of brainless binging it eats beyond capacity, becoming an overstuffed prisoner of plenty. Unable to move, unable to ingest another bite, its insatiable quest for more now eclipsed by its own corpulence. Languishing in the wake of gluttony, staring into an existential void, it wraps itself in a silken blanket and goes to sleep. And there, deep in the dozing larvae, a single cell appears. A cell unlike the others, not driven by gluttony, a silent anomaly that simply wants to be. But the caterpillar's immune system, a vigilant guardian of the status quo, does what the system has always done: devour, deplete, destroy. But then another cell appears. Devour, deplete, destroy. Another cell. Devour, deplete, destroy. Another. Devour, deplete, destroy. Another. Devour, deplete, destroy. Another. Devour, deplete, destroy. Another. Devour, deplete, destroy. A chaos of destruction, turning what was once form into a murky mush of caterpillar soup. And still they come, these single cells amidst the onslaught of the self's defenses. Ooh, I lost my line. And still they come, these single cells, amongst the onslaught of the self-defenses, clustering together in growing huddles of silent solidarity, ever-expanding masses, a testament to the power of unity, until what once was caterpillar is no more. And all that is left are these new cells with a name that whispers of dreams and possibilities. And in this final clustering, each cell's place in the whole now informs it of its goal, each assuming its destined role in the tapestry of new existence, becoming something beyond imagination, shifting from consumption to creation. This one understanding that it is a cell with which to see, and it becomes part of an eye. This one understanding that it is a cell with which to fly, and it becomes part of a wing. This one understanding that it is a cell with which to breathe, and the butterfly takes a deep, deep breath, expanding its body, breaking the silken shell. It spreads wide its vibrant wings and flies. Biologist check that one out for facts. The next one I don't really like to read, but this one was written on the way here, very much inspired by Gogh. And I was reading about her, and one of the things that I read was that she went to all these art specialists to try and get them to understand that Vincent van Gogh was a great artist, and they just called her this crazy woman driven mad by grief. And this is a piece for her. There is nothing the world fears more than a woman lamenting. A woman expressing her grief fully with passion. For millennia, we women have gathered to weep and wail, pulling at our clothes, ripping our hair, expressing despair, but for just as long, we have been silenced by the powers that be. Why is it always the warring nations that forbid the lamentation of women? Banning us from throwing ourselves on the bodies of the deceased, they do not want our tears for the dead. They want us to hail the fallen as heroes instead, to celebrate, not commiserate. For who would sanction war if its true voice was heard? And so they oppress our tears, urge us to weep against our nature, alone and noiseless, behind closed doors, on the in-breath. And so we forget to cry. we forgot how to cry. But the newborn knows how to cry, loudly, openly, on the outbreath. Ah! Throwing their sorrows in the world to be heard, to be held, to be shared. When did we learn to cry on the in-breath? Swallowing our tears, filling our bodies with sorrow, drowning in our aloneness. When did we allow our tears to be silenced? There is nothing the powers that be fear more than a cry on the outbreath, than our grief openly, passionately expressed. For sorrow expressed is how we connect. Sorrow expressed is how we heal. Every cry on the outbreath is a drink not drunk, a drug not taken, a product not bought, a hatred not hated, a fist not punched, a war not fought. In a world that benefits from our wounds, there is nothing the powers that be fear more than our cries on the outbreath, than a woman's grief openly, loudly expressed. For our sorrows are our strengths. And the last piece is a piece about the fact that I didn't know Joe's story and how important it is for stories to be shared. Where does your story begin? Perhaps your story began just now when you came into this hall, or this morning when you woke up. But probably your story began much earlier than that. Maybe your story began with a seemingly inconsequential decision that would go on to determine the rest of your fate, leading you to be the person you are right now, right here in this moment. The decision to turn left instead of right, to look up just when you did, to order strawberry ice cream. You may never know what that decision was. Or maybe your story began the very first time you took agency and decided to do what you wanted to do instead of what you were told. That moment you looked your mother in the eye and put that fistful of dirt in your mouth anyway. Or maybe your story began on the day that you were born, or the day you were conceived, or the day your parents met, or the very first time an ancestor imagined your existence and laughingly joked about a great-great-great-great-great-grandchild from now. Where do stories begin? Does Little Red Riding Hood's story really begin the moment she puts on the red cloak and sets out into the woods with a basket full of goodies for Grandma? Did she not wake up that morning or go to bed the night before? Did her grandmother not hold her in her arms for the very first time as a baby, forging that bond that would lead to her setting out into the forest on that fateful day? Searching for the beginning of story, we keep uncovering more story. Further and further back in time we go to before we painted on the walls of caves to finally find the first story ever told. And from that story, all other stories would grow. So perhaps what we call your story and my story are not separate stories at all, but rather chapters in the story. And for the story to be complete, your story too must be told. So tell your stories. Tell your stories to your loved ones so they may hold them in their hearts, and tell your stories to strangers, even though they may only remember parts. Tell your stories to the birds so they may sing them in the forests, and tell your stories to the clouds so they may sweep them over oceans and drop them like rain on the plains. Tell your stories to the rivers so they may carry them to the oceans and spread them around the world. Tell your stories so that in a future far from now, a stranger who has never seen your face, nor heard your name, nor visited any of the places where you came, who has never even imagined your existence, will tell a story that holds in its core a kernel of your essence. For within them all stories hold parts of the souls of those by whom they have been told. So hold the stories that you're told. Hold them gently like loved ones. Do not dismiss them with disdain or rip them unthinking from their home or treat them like objects you can own. No, hold the story that you're told. And like a friend, sit with it by the fire. Walk through forests and fields and along the shores of lakes. Be curious, inquire, until you know it like you know your oldest friend. And when you know the story through and through, then, and only then, add shapes and colors of your own and let the story go, and be the vessel it has always been, holding within the experience and knowledge of generations that came before, and now also yours. And so stories entwine. And what we call the beginnings of stories are perhaps not so much beginnings, but rather moments in space and time where we join the story. Just like I join your story now, and you join mine. So, if the beginning of your story is not so easily found, perhaps the question should rather be, where does your story end? And the answer to that is so much easier to give. Your story ends when it is no longer told. So tell your stories. Tell your stories, let them travel with the wind, let them change in shape and size, let them free and let them fly, but do not let them die. Tell your stories. Tell my stories. Tell Joe's story. Tell our story.